Let's go. What's up, everyone? My name is Leo. I'm your Kabbalah instructor for today. This is Kabbalah Explained Simply, and our topic for today is real Kabbalah, real science. We'll be back to it. Excuse me. Before we do, I'll let you know that we have an active chat on the YouTube. We're live on YouTube and Facebook. There's a chat on YouTube. There's some great folks there. I see, first of all, I want to say hi to Sylvia and Simona from Spain, and Patricia. Hey, Patricia from Ohio, and friends from Cape Town, from all over, and our support team is there. I see Ruth, and I think there are there's at least another person there. So any other question that you have, feel free to post onto the chat. If you're new to Kabbalah, this is not going to explain everything about Kabbalah. It's going to explain simply one aspect of Kabbalah, and specifically today we're going to explain is real Kabbalah real science, in case you're wondering. But if you have other questions, feel free to check the rest of the channel. It has a wealth of videos on almost any topic that relates to Kabbalah and that Kabbalah has anything to say about, and also there are many ways into the wisdom from this channel. And then if you've done a few of those and you want to take your studies a step further, you can go to take our self-study courses on KabU Connect, and from there the journey will start for you. But if you're just here, if you just wandered here because you have questions, because there was something you wanted to know and you weren't sure who to ask, where to ask, this is your place. We've been doing this for a while now, and we are trying to make it as accessible to people as possible, because this is the time for that. Actually, the world is in a place where more and more people, we find, are asking these deep questions, right? The questions of what's the meaning of my life? Where did I come from? Where am I going? What is the purpose of all of this? What's the meaning of and purpose of all this? The suffering? What's preventing us humans from, actually living a better life? We seem to have all the conditions, all the components of life of royalty. If you compare your life today to the life of a king 150 years ago, you're better off in potential. But people are less happy, less satisfied, less, I don't know what's the word, put together. There's this sense that everything we know is gradually falling apart, depending on where you are in the system. And so there's a reason why Kabbalists wrote about Kabbalah and about the wisdom that explains the purpose and meaning of life, and destined it for these days. And so more and more people are interested in the wisdom, and it's not a religion, it's not a religious thing at all. In fact, it's much more like a science. Now, is it a pure science like physics and biology and chemistry? Is it like any other natural science? Is it like a social science? Is it more theoretical, more practical? These are some of the things we're going to try to answer today. Will I be able to make the case for Kabbalah that it is a science as real as any other science? You will be the judge of that, but we will do our best to try to put it to the test based on scientific criteria. Now, it's interesting because Kabbalah, well, put Kabbalah aside for a second. Humans have been involved with some scientific aspect of life for millennia, essentially working making observations on where we live, how to grow food, charting the stars, predicting certain changes in weather and other natural phenomena 10, 20, 50 years into the future. All those things were, they sort of carried the hallmarks of a budding science. They lacked several other things, and we will talk about it today. But in a sense, humanity has always did something like science in one form or another. It's really when we moved into big cities and we started to really spend more time together and started to think more seriously about life and how to make it better and where it comes from and where it's going, that we started to look at a more rigorous application of that thinking on what we would later call science. The Greeks were very good at that. They used their reasoning to really look at life and look at nature and try to make sense of it. They had one major issue, which is they were purely philosophical, meaning for the most part there was no experimentation according to Greek philosophy. There were ideas, there were concepts, and then some of them you could put to the test, you can live your life accordingly. Others remain in the realms of philosophy, and that philosophical thought has stuck with us till today. But toward the end of the Greek Empire, there were some Greeks who started, some Greek scientists, philosophers who started to dabble in experimentation, but the church put an end to that pretty quickly. For obvious reasons, it was considered a threat to the hegemony of the church, and so science was put on hold. Not completely do away with science, but let's just put it in the back room somewhere. And so humanity entered the Dark Ages, which were dark for the most part because of the absence of a true scientific discipline, until the Muslims brought back the idea of scientific observation and hypothesis and experimentation. Specifically, a Muslim scientist who pretty much invented the science of optology and looking at light, and the first one to notice the effect of camera obscura, which was the precursor to our modern camera. Let me find his name, just so his name was Ibn al-Hitam. Okay, that was the guy from the 11th century. So he's pretty much credited with restarting the more disciplined approach to science, which involved experimentation. So not only observation of natural phenomenon, what we call facts, there's a fact, right? The sun is rising, it's a fact. It's cold outside, it's a fact. I'm sick, it's a fact. It's an observation of a certain fact. And then a hypothesis. I'm sick because I ate something bad, or germs, or I'm possessed by something, right? Whatever it is. And then through observation, then experimentation, we can gradually rule out the reasons that are not contributing to my sickness and eventually settle on a theory that probably germs give rise to sickness. And that's usually the sort of the idea of science that we're accustomed to. But science as a whole continued to develop as the human ego developed as well. And we learn in Kabbalah that the human ego started small and it essentially evolved alongside human history. So what we see as history and the expansion of humanity and the development of humanity and the growth in how humanity uses tools and words and science and all those things, those are all the result, the outcome, the expression of a growing will to receive, as it's called in Kabbalah, the desire to receive maximum pleasure for minimum effort. And as humanity grew and the scientific way of thinking expanded with it, we get more people not only thinking about science, but really analyzing it, what it means and how it works. And the books of Al-Haytham, they make their way, they get translated to Greek, Latin, they make their way across Europe, they get all the way up to Isaac Newton, and and his peers. And so these are foundations that are being gradually laid, right, in humanity. And we get into the scientific revolution and the modern times, and at some point there was a scientist, his name was Karl Popper, and he also was a philosopher of science or a historian of science, and he also looked and tried to chart certain characteristics of science. So typically when we talk about what makes a real science, we talk about it in the context of these ideas that grew from the time of Ahitham all the way through the scientific revolution, Karl Popper, and modern times. So we're going to look at those things and understand what they are. There aren't that many principles. There are 6 principles. You can find them worded slightly different depending on who you ask and where you look. But the idea is the same, and we'll see if they apply to Kabbalah and what it means for us. And do we even care if Kabbalah is a science or not? Is that important? That's also a good question. So if you have questions, by the way, send them to the chat. Let me just get the questions, question and answers document. There is the team will pick up the. Hold on, where it is? There it is. The team will pick up your questions and post them in the chat, and we will try to answer as many questions. Oh, last thing before we dive really in, if you stay after this session, the session is 1 hour long. After that, we have a more intimate Zoom session with me and anyone who can make it, and you can ask even more questions, and we can kind of go deeper into certain aspects. And last but not least, if you have questions that are not exactly on the topic of Kabbalah and science, or is Kabbalah science, that's okay too. Feel free to ask. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible. So, where were we? Okay, so one important idea to consider is that not everything is true, but not everything can be falsified, and that's kind of that's at the heart of really the scientific thought, as compared, for example, to the religious thinking. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of times in the mainstream media, science and religion don't mix. Although you'll find many religious people who are scientists, or many scientists who are religious people, and sometimes these beliefs are held in secret. But there's always been this interplay between science and religion, and in fact you'll see that there are really 2 ways of trying to look at the same thing. But science has this quality, which is if there is an observation and you make a hypothesis and you even extract a theory from multiple observations, and you present this theory needs to be, you need to be able to falsify it to check if it's true or false in order for it to be considered part of the scientific world and community, right? To be considered a scientific theory. Because if you say, well, there's a God, but I cannot prove that God doesn't exist, then there's a problem with how I approach that argument to begin with. But if I say that there are laws in nature, and you are, if you are working with these laws, then you achieve certain results, and if you're working against these laws, then you achieve other results. That's already something else. If I talk about gravity, for example, gravity is a law because it can be expressed in a formula, in a mathematical formula, and it describes the working of a force. And people knew about this, the existence of gravity. They knew how it works. They didn't know why it works the way it works. This only came much later, but everybody can feel that there is something that's pulling on you, and then people started to understand how this force is working, how to use it to our own benefit, and only later we got into discussion of why it works the way it works. When Einstein came with his general theory of relativity and explained how the curvature of space and time works and how masses attract other masses, and so on and so forth. So this is something that you can observe, and you can also make do experiments on and check if it works or if it doesn't work, and therefore you can falsify certain assumptions, or you can corroborate other assumptions, and that already makes it something that is scientific in nature. But there are other things. So let's go into the 6 principles that define real science, and we'll see if they apply to Kabbalah and what it means to us. Let's see. I'm checking the chat if there's something interesting. We have Florida, New Jersey, San Diego, Ethiopia. Hey, Galaya. Great. Portland, Israel. Okay, so we have people from all over the place. Yes, so where is it? All right, next one. All right, so the first principle is called purity of intention. Purity of intention is an interesting one. It means that when you you make an observation and you have a hypothesis, you are willing to test it, and you're not trying to rig the test to prove your hypothesis. Right? Does it make sense? It means that we resist the confirmation bias. In other words, what I feel to be true must be true. Right? How many times you go into an argument thinking, well, I feel this is true, therefore it must be true, therefore you are wrong and I am right, now let's talk. That's a terrible way to approach an argument, and it's a terrible way to approach any scientific experimentation whatsoever. So we are, as Kabbalists, we're interested in finding the truth. I remember about myself, I was looking for answers. I wasn't looking for someone to say something that will appease me and feel good. Oh yeah, yes, when you die, you become a unicorn and you fly forever. That's great. I want to believe that, right? Like, no. If you're here, if you're listening to this, you have questions that cannot be answered with, I don't want to say, I don't want to disrespect, because even the strangest fairy tales have a place in our development. But we grow from being a child, right? Santa Claus exists. No, it exists for a child as a good concept. But when you grow up, you grow out of it. And now you have to replace it with a more internal concept of goodness, and right, we don't always do it. Many of us remain hopeless children waiting for something good to drop out of the chimney. But in reality, when you are trying to have any sort of scientific discussion, even when it relates to spirituality, like in Kabbalah, I'm interested in finding the truth. And it's best, as we say, to be a good skeptic and come to this method, not wishing for a certain result, but actually willing to doubt everything and put everything to a test. And that's what Kabbalists do. Because skepticism is a good immune mechanism to confirmation bias. All right, so I'm not coming here to trying to prove to myself that I can just live my life the way I want, and then when I die, I go to some heaven and I live there happily ever after. The end. Right? It's a great story. It's not how things work in nature. And so we want to go there with that attitude. There's a good story about, we have some friends, by the way, so full disclosure, we have some friends who are bigger scientists than me. I dabbled in science. I started when I was looking for answers. I was looking in biology and thermodynamics and chemistry and physics and all those disciplines to try to find answers. But as I said, they're mostly interested in how things work, or what is the mechanism. It's not, or a scientific why. In other words, all the natural sciences applied confirmation bias when it came to why. In other words, they were not ready to accept any explanation that they couldn't readily test. Okay, and that's one of the reasons there's a gap between science and spiritual work, because the tools of the trades, the instruments. But we'll get to that in a second, so don't let me distract you. But there is an interesting story. So we have some friends. We have a friend who's an astrophysicist, quantum physicist. We have some great biologists and other kinds of other branches of physics. So we have some really serious people who are involved in Kabbalah. Okay, just to give it some some context. So they told me about Paul Dirac, who was a British mathematician at the beginning of the century, and he just loved math, and he made his calculations, not trying to prove one thing or another, just trying to find solution to his equations. And while trying to do it, he applied some mathematical equations to quantum, to the early days of quantum physics, and he said, well, the math shows that either there is a particle that's traveling back in time, which we knew could not be the case, or it's a particle that travels in the correct direction of time but has an opposite charge to an electron. And at that time, it made no sense. Nobody's like, what are you talking about? The atom has a proton, an electron, that's it. And he said, no, the equation shows otherwise. He really just followed the purity of the equations, not trying to skew them this way or that way, not trying to correct them to match what people expected. And the result was that he discovered the positron, or the antimatter. So this was a beautiful example of someone just following the equations. For example, so purity of intention, and Kabbalists are definitely some of the purest people that I know, because they want nothing more than to find the real meaning to everything. They're not going to settle for some candy. They want the answer, even if it's bitter, even if it's uncomfortable, or it's difficult, or it necessitates all kinds of work. I want that. I'd rather live in truth than delude myself with some sweet pill, right? And then realize that it's wrong, when I'm about to leave, right? So that's what Kabbalists want. They want contact with the Creator, and that's what the Creator wants for the created beings. That's the purpose of creation, according to Kabbalah. Revelation of the Creator to the created beings. So that's what the Kabbalists want as well. And they're willing to work towards that. So that's purity of intention. That's the first principle. Second principle is called empirical testing. Now that sounds... where's my water? Oh, I did not bring water. Great. That sounds pretty straightforward, but it means that you can take different aspects of the theory and you can measure them, right, through experimentation. And in Kabbalah, this happens to be something that's readily available for anyone starting on this path. Unlike in other spiritual disciplines or sometimes religious disciplines where this is what we do and you just do it and that's it. Why? We don't know. Well, because someone said so, and what should be the result? No result. This is what you do. There's something, right? Something lacking there, and in Kabbalah, everything that you read about in the books are actually descriptions of an experiment. So when you start to work on the Kabbalistic path, you will see very quickly, if you're not already there, that beyond the sort of rearrangement of certain intellectual concepts, okay, ideas put forth about the system, the nature of the system, how things work, and all of that, very quickly you actually are invited to join a group. And the group becomes your lab. And the details of the experiment are written in the books. And if you follow the details of the experiment, you can replicate that in your group. It's like someone's giving you the blueprints to the Hadron Collider and say, look, you get $20 billion and you can build it in your backyard and you can accelerate particles and you can get the same results. But you can't say that it's not true just because you can't do it or you can't commit yourself to doing it. If you want to do it, here's what you need. Here's the tools. Here are the instruments of the trade. Go ahead, apply it. So that's the essence of empirical testing. So Kabbalah definitely stands to that idea. And I'll give an example. You can Kabbalists tell you, those of you who are longer than a month on this path, you've heard that the the way to reveal the creator is through equivalence of form, okay, which is, by the way, a physical law. We'll get to it later if we have time. But it means that if you want to feel the creator, who is the quality of love and bestowal, the creator is the force of love and bestowal, the law of love. If you want to feel that, you need to also be made of love or display qualities of love in order to feel love. So if you want to feel the creator, that's what you need to do. Now, where do you do it? Do you do it for just every person in the world? No. It's like trying to conduct an experiment in the middle of the street. Too many variables, too many contaminants. No. You take it into a lab. Where's the lab? The group. In the group, you can apply these efforts to love, to care for other people in the group, and you will see the results of that as prescribed in the Kabbalistic books. So Kabbalists explain that if you apply this force of love, if you make efforts to love and to care for the people in your group, you'll begin to feel an equal and opposite force, a resistance. Again, by the way, a physical property. Okay, every force has an equal and opposite force, right? You feel the same thing. It's your will to receive rising against that, resisting that. That's the resistance you work against. So these ideas, without getting too much into them, these ideas show you right away that you have these principles that you can measure if you have the correct instruments and the correct lab to do it in. Moving on, we'll do one more principle and then maybe we'll do a couple of questions. Our next principle is, it's called falsifiability. Okay, it's a mouthful, but it's an extension of the empirical law that we saw before, the empirical principle. It means that essentially what we started with in the beginning, so now we're coming full circle. Any model, any aspect of a model can be tested and potentially proven false through experimentation, and that's really, really important, because if you can't prove or disprove something, then it's really just like, okay, you got to take someone's word for it, and that's it, and goodbye. There's no dialogue. There's no place for work. There's no place for choice, for effort, for any kind of application of our faculties. So falsifiability is a really important principle, because the entire wisdom of Kabbalah provides a method, and the method allows you at every step of the way to work according to the principles prescribed by Kabbalists and get results. And see, okay, if I did this, I will get that. If I didn't do this, then I will not get that. You have a very clear relationship. So while you cannot, you cannot falsify the entire wisdom overnight, that's okay, because you cannot falsify the entire field of math or physics in one fell swoop. You need to acquire a certain foundational knowledge and certain experience and experimentation, and come up with your own conclusions from work that you apply in the field before you can start to falsify or even update certain aspects. And that's what actually every scientific method does. And it's interesting because it actually leads into the fourth principle, and we'll do questions after that, which is corroboration and not verification. You have to understand that in science, what scientists are doing, really, they're busy eliminating theories. That's what scientists do. Everybody can come up with a theory, but unless it's it can stand repeated attempts to refute it, it's not worth its salt, right? So, and even then, when it survives all these attempts, it still remains a conjecture. We have to understand that everything we know about the world is a result of this process, but the end result is not the truth, because you can't discover the full truth of where we are unless or before you rise to a degree above it. So you can discover a lot of truths about the physics, right? The inanimate matter. A lot of truths will be discovered. You can discover some truths about the vegetative degree in nature. Still fewer truths about the animate degree and even human body, the animate part of our being, the human body, the organs and everything. We know some things about it. We can't say that we know the absolute truth about it. Far from it. But we are trying. And certainly the human in us, we for the most part still clueless about it. We are finding little bits of information, but we're mostly groping in the dark. And then from the dark we get a ray of light, and that ray of light is usually painting an inverted picture, kind of like the picture in the dark room of Ibn, what was his name? I don't have his name right now. Ibn al-Hitam, he will forgive me, who stumbled upon the principle of dark room and photography by observing a ray of light entering his dark room and projecting an inverted image on his wall. So we have that. We have an inverted image on a wall, and now we can try to make sense and experiment and try to theorize something about it. And for the most part, it works. It works for people on this level. And even the most outlandish theories that we had were good for the time. In other words, keep in mind that when when Columbus set sail, he didn't know there was another continent between Europe and Asia. Right? He just thought that he's gonna go around and hit Asia. They didn't even think there was another continent. But it didn't stop him from using the knowledge that he had and trying to get through it. And this is who we are and what we're doing in every discipline of human life. But with spirituality, it's a little different because we have the privilege of a few Kabbalists who attain something. They're like these professors, distinguished professors, right? In every academy, that you go to their lessons specifically because because they got it. They have the experience, the ability to articulate things, the knowledge. They know all the ins and outs, and you go and you need to go there and listen to them and give them their due respect in order to receive something from them. And the same thing, by the way, goes for Kabbalah. We have a concept in Kabbalah. It's called faith in the sages or belief in the sages. In other words, you approach your experiments, whether it's in physics or in Kabbalah, and you're not going to be able to reprove every principle and every thing that was found until that moment. No, you have to take certain things as given. Why? Because I trust this professor and this professor and this professor. And Kabbalah is the same thing. We trust the teachers who came before us. And in Kabbalah, unlike in other disciplines, there's an practically undisturbed chains of Kabbalists. I know who my teacher is and who was his teacher and his teacher's teacher, and going all the way back down to the first person who had a moment of spiritual attainment and started to theorize about the existence of the upper worlds and the relationship to them and how to reach them and all the rest of it. So just like this guy in the 11th century, or like Newton, who had a moment of clarity, a ray of light that came into his mind and shone a light on something, and then he worked to theorize, hypothesize, and theorize about that. Kabbalists were doing the same work, except on the level of human, not on the level of the still vegetative and animate. And that's how we approach our experiments as well. So before we go into the last two principles, let's take a couple of questions and remind you that if you have more questions or more nuanced questions and you want to ask and sort of ask and iterate, you can do it in the Zoom that's coming right after this live. So I should ask Ruth. Ruth, are these in order? these questions. Like, do I start from the top or from the bottom? I never know. Okay, I'll start from the top. Michael Erdman is asking, what integrally greater sense, science, and salience may come as our technologically interconnectedness, I guess, advance ventures into what is true truth, more truthful going forward? It's good. I think I understand the question, and it's a great question. There is one issue, and the difference between if you're asking about like what is the science of Kabbalah, because today's topic is Kabbalah a science, but if you finish today's live and you say to yourself, okay, I think it sounds like Kabbalah might be a science, and it might be something that I need, like that additional proof point, even though we'll see in the end that it has nothing to do with proof in this sense. But let's say you were missing that piece and you decide to follow Kabbalah, you will discover pretty quickly that the instruments of experimentation and the subject of the experimentation is you. And so the problem is not technological advancement. The problem is that the scientist needs to advance. The scientist needs to study himself and change from within. That's what opens the door to spirituality. No scientific leap will ever do it. We can try as much as we want. We can improve communication and continue to augment powers of our intellect, our mind, our body. You can get stronger limbs and exoskeletons and neural chips and all the rest of it, but none of it will give you a change of what's at the essence of every human, which is a desire. We are feeling creatures. We are made of desires. We're like an EQ of desires, and on top of these desires you have intentions. So the matter of everything is desire. The form of everything is intention. That's where the magic happens. That's what dictates your perception of reality. So perception of reality, and there are plenty of Kabbalah Explained Simply on that. Just we may get into it if I have some time, but we perceive reality through our desire to receive pleasure. We work, in fact, on a formula. This actually, maybe we can do a little detour on that. Hold on. All right. So we work on this formula of, let's call it pleasure. Okay, so maximum pleasure at minimum pain. Okay, so that's these are two P's. Let's make it a little more. Okay, so pleasure and this is pain. Okay, that's your function right there. Maximum pleasure, minimum pain. That's what drives you through life. That's what creates the perception of your reality, and it's a very limited formula, because it only takes into account one variable, which is you. You're the only container of this formula is you. So it's extremely limited. But if you could change the direction of this formula from you to everyone else, then already this becomes, this could go from zero, or from, not from zero, we should say from 1 to infinity. That's already a different, this is you to the power of infinity already. That's already a different story, a different formula, different perception. Okay, that's just a little something. I don't know. Let's go back to questions. Wait, Ruth, I'm confused. Do I take questions from below or questions from... I'll jump to the bottom. Patricia, hi Patricia. How does the 6 dots in that structure relate to a 10? 6 dots, you mean the 6 principles? Yes, Patricia? Maybe she's asking about that. They don't relate directly. I'm relating them as I go one by one. But these are general principles of science. So every theory that is considered scientific, every discipline that is considered scientific has to meet these criteria. Okay, I hope that's what you're asking. Veronica is asking how to apply a scientific criteria of a discovery being peer-reviewed for the Kabbalists. A perfect question. So that's exactly what we're talking about. Everything that Kabbalists do, they write. So every discovery, every argument, everything it gets written and passed down from generation to generation. Every holy book, which we ascribe to Judaism, the religion, is actually a Kabbalistic book. So the early books of Adam, then of Abraham, then of Moses, the Bible, which you know, the Torah, then the Zohar, then the Talmud, and all those texts and some of those offshoots that came from those texts, they all represent the inner work and the interplay of those forces within a person. You want to feel it, you want to also have access to this, you have to apply these principles to you. So in a way, Kabbalists were the first ones to include peer review, because the peers were your actual friends with whom you were doing the experimentation. You cannot do Kabbalah or spirituality without another person. The smallest group, as we say in Kabbalah, is 2 people. Why? Because you need to examine your attitude relative to someone else. You can't just say, "Oh, I love God, God loves me, and we're friends, and I'm righteous." No, it doesn't work this way. you wanna show you love God? Fine, love all His creatures. That's the part of God. God doesn't need your love in that sense. He's complete. He's whole. He doesn't have any deficiency. But the creatures, that's a different story. You can apply this love. And that's why in Kabbalah we have a saying, from love of the created beings to love of the Creator. So in a way, and like I said, we don't do it with the entire world right away. You cannot, because in an egoistic world, you're simply going to be taken advantage of. That's what we do it in a group, where we all share the same goal. We're all the same scientists. I want to explore, investigate my desire, how to work with my desire and with my intention in order to reveal the Creator, the highest law, the highest force of love, prove the existence of this force of love. Where do I do it? Here in this lab with these peers. So you're constantly subject to peer review, even though the work is done by yourself, on yourself, but the results are in the relationship with others, and you get to constantly talk about it, read again the details of the experiment in the books, and continue to apply it. So it's a very interesting dynamic where you very quickly you get to experiment and experience those things. You don't need to publish any papers, because all the papers have already been published. Once you reach attainment, that's a different story. Once you reach attainment, once you really have a breakthrough, once you get to add to the theory, which is where we are right now. I don't know if we have time. If we have time, we'll talk about it. Where are we in this timeline of the science of Kabbalah? That will be an interesting thing to discuss, and maybe we'll get to it when we're done. More question. P.O. Anari. What models can we use to understand further development in AI and quantum computation? Well, that's a big question. Since I'm neither a quantum scientist or an AI scientist, I use AI, but I don't pretend to be an AI scientist. I understand the basics of machine learning, but I think I will predict that there's going to be a certain, on the one hand, a certain natural evolution of AI and quantum physics. You will be able to get a lot out of these creations. So for anyone who's not able to rise above the level of humanity, the animalistic human, let's call it. For us, we may get to a place where some robots, let's call them, will be indistinguishable from a human. Already you see that today people can receive a lot from a robot. Knowing it's a robot doesn't matter. I can ascribe feelings and I can receive a reaction, and that already elicits certain something in me which I can work with. I don't need it to be a real human. But that's only enough to exist on this level, on the animalistic level of the human. We're talking about reaching a higher level. And for that, I don't know that the AI is going to play an important role. We might use it to organize ourselves, to share information, to do exercises with, etc., etc. But I don't think that they will have a direct role, at least not immediately, in the transformation of the heart, which humanity needs right now. Patricia, we've done. Veronica, we've done. This is done. Let's erase those. Never was. I like that name. Did Einstein know two meanings to the word time? Einstein. Well, what time is it? Okay, I'll do this and then I'll do other. I want to finish the other principles. Einstein is an interesting example. Side note, okay? Einstein was not a religious person. At the same time, he did feel that there is some force, some organizing principle, and he refused to believe that, as he said it in his own his famous quote, God doesn't play dice, meaning there are no coincidences, things don't happen randomly, everything has a beginning and an end. You may not see the end result, it doesn't mean it doesn't have one. Things might work on a huge scale, or work in such a way that certain conditions have to be met before you can reveal another layer, right? Another level, like in a game. This is absolutely the case. And so Einstein was very cautious not to make these distinctions, and he also worked within a very specific scientific community. So he had to eventually deliver on certain requirements, right? The ideas that are sound, that are mathematical. Even though it was really hard to explain his reasoning, and to some extent, Einstein was not. When he came to do his math, he wasn't pure of intention, like Dirac, for example. He had a thought experiment that he already proved to him what he needed to see. Okay, that was like his ray of light coming into the dark room, and now he has something a clear expression of the law, and that he has to work with. And now he started to use the math to work towards that, and he also famously added a variable to balance his math because he didn't think it was correct. Later on, turned out that he was correct, and there was a need for a variable. What I'm saying is that Einstein is an interesting example, but we probably won't have time to open it up properly. But enough to say that time is relative, and space-time both emanated as a result of the Big Bang, which was the result of what we call in Kabbalah the shattering of the vessels. So the shattering of the spiritual reality gave birth to a reality that's even lower than that, which is the corporeal, material reality we have today, space and time. The ego, the will to receive in order to receive, or the ego is what creates the sense of, or what contributes to the sense of separation that makes me see myself as separate from you and others and every other particle. So what shattered, according to Kabbalah, was the perception of oneness, and that new shattered state allowed for the ego to just fill that space and continue to expand and push particles away from each other. And that's the trajectory we've been on, essentially. All of our known universe and humanity are moving towards greater and greater individuation, even as we are being pushed to greater and greater degrees of order as complete systems. So we need to now put the two together: this extreme individuation and the extremely high degrees of order of all these particles and put them together, find this unity with the uniqueness within the unity. So time is relative, and in spirituality there is no time. There are only changing states. You change a state, it means that the little wheel did a little click, and you can advance. You do enough clicks on the small wheel, then the big wheel does another major click, right? So that's how you get those leaps in evolution. But there's no time in the sense of astronomical time and some motion that denotes time, or the aging of cells and that sort of thing. Rather, in spirituality, there's only states. If you don't change, you can be stuck in the same state forever, experiencing physiological, biological time as we have it here. But there's no time in spirituality. Okay. Let's see. This we've done. Okay, I'll leave 2 questions to the end. Let me go to the last 2 principles because they're important. Where were we? Okay, so we kind of touched on it, and so we'll say a few more words. So, and your questions helped elaborate on that. So, but testing and improvement, as I said, we're actually busy eliminating theories and expanding our understanding of any given model in any given scientific discipline. Okay, it's very important to understand that when scientists say, well, this is scientific truth, no, this is the latest scientific conjecture, but we shorthand it for truth because that's what's true for now. So, we have a conjecture that the earth is round, for example, and that's survived countless observations and experimentation with different instrumentations. And so everybody says, everybody who's in his right mind will accept it as the leading conjecture, hence the current truth. So to go back and say, oh, no, the earth is flat because all kinds of weird things that can be proven, that's just sad for humanity. But I guess we need that too. But it's okay, and we may find later down the line, maybe hundreds of years, I don't know, when we advance sufficiently, we may discover, for example, that all of this material reality, 3-dimensional reality, is really only existed in our perception. Does not actually exist. Matter, this is not the real matter, rather this is the matter that we have to work with in our current state. Once you rise out of that state, that matter doesn't even exist anymore. Okay, Kabbalah actually describes this phenomenon and this inevitable turn of events. But for science, it doesn't really matter because science doesn't have access to those layers. And for now, we're working with the current assumptions and the current conjectures. And in that sense, that's okay. And Kabbalists in every generation actually tested, attained, and then improved the theory. So not in essence, and that's important to understand, in spirituality, when we talk about authentic or true spirituality, true spiritual attainment, it doesn't matter the discipline. It could be Kabbalah or some other discipline. If a person attains spirituality, they change that direction that I explained of the intention from to myself to others. That's what changes the direction of perception, opens up a whole chunk of reality that was heretofore concealed from us. So in essence, when Kabbalists begin to attain, you have to understand that their instruments of perception, okay, the ego, is only as big as what they have to work with. So in every generation, the human ego is growing. What we call the coarseness of the subject matter is growing. Hence, you can attain more detail in what you're seeing. So we can increase the resolution and then refine some of our observations. And that's what's been happening with Kabbalists across the history of Kabbalah. We have a famous example of the Kabbalah of the Ramak versus the Kabbalah of the Ari. I made a Kabbalah Explained Simply of the Ari a few weeks back. You can watch it. And I explain more in detail how was Ramak Kabbalah taught, studied, and the change that they are remade. So did they what? Was that a different method, a different spiritual world? No, the same observations, but with greater, coarser, more refined instruments, hence greater resolution, greater detail, hence better theories as to how things work. And so that was the big difference. And I want to jump to the last principle, reductionism. Kabbalah is beautiful. Again, you can say a lot about that, but essentially there's in every good, sound scientific theory, you have a minimum number of hypotheses. You're trying to reduce the number of hypotheses and simplify the model as much as you can, because it's hard enough to prove one thing than if you have a bunch of crazy hypotheses, right? Like you say, reality is made of little strings, and these strings are connected to a bigger string, and then there's a spaghetti monster behind, right? There is such a theory, incidentally. The more crazy hypotheses you add on top of your already groundbreaking hypothesis, the harder it is for your theory to be evaluated, understood, accepted, and so on and so forth. So Kabbalah in that sense is beautiful, because even though there are some again, big principles that you have to account for. Okay, there is a creator, he's the good who does good, there's only one, that sort of thing, and you need to work to attain those things through the experimentation that we discussed. Nevertheless, the principles are very simple. You have a light, you have a vessel, and you have a light, and there's a screen in between them. This is the sort of the foundation of Kabbalah. It doesn't get any more elegant than that, right? And the formula, maximum pain over minimum pleasure. Maximum pleasure over minimum pain, right? These things that function, right? Just to name a few, there are a few more basic principles, but the core ideas behind the method are really that elegant and that simple. Kind of like our E equals mc squared. Just one example. I'm not saying that every scientific theory has to end up with 3 clean parameters, but it goes a long way. That cleanliness of the model really helps deliver something that is closer to the essence of things, and that's what we're after. So before we close, I will say, I'm sorry. Okay, 2 things actually. I'll close. One, so in Kabbalah we have. Oh, you're not seeing my screen. Sorry. We have in Kabbalah 3 pillars on which the science is based, and you'll see that they are really scientific in essence. We have the teacher, so you need a chief scientist, right, or a professor, the guy who you can follow. Do you give him, your house and the keys to your car? No, but you trust in him enough to follow his advice and try to implement it, right? So you don't have to go and prove every principle, on your own. You don't go and prove every mathematical axiom just to get to a squared plus b squared equals c squared on a 90 degrees triangle, right? It's been done. You can move forward. You can move beyond it. Is it the absolute truth in all the worlds? We don't know, but it's good for where we are. I can work with it. Same thing here. You have the teacher, and you apply this belief in the sages that will, right, or the trust in this advice to follow it, at least to receive something from them. We also have the books. The books are the details of the experiment. They're a bit more than that. I'm kind of reducing them to something a little of this world, for lack of a better term. But these books really represent a certain bridge between the upper worlds and this world. They are essentially the ladder. You can engage with the words, that's on the most external level, but the deeper you go, you can actually use them to connect to the author that is somewhere on a higher degree of the ladder. So the books become this rope or this ladder you can climb to reach higher. So they describe the details of the experiment, but they also provide you some of the tools to work with. More on that if you follow a lesson on the Book of Zohar, for example, and other texts. And lastly, you have the group, which is your lab. That's, again, the hallmark of a good science, is you can do experimentation, and it happens in a group setting. And my very last slide, so how it is a little different, you know, it is true that we have, as I said, faith in the sages. So yes, it's akin to, following your professor in college and kind of, but even your professor in college, you don't take his word for anything and everything, assuming you're, a thinking person and you just agree with everything you're being told. You try to work with it. But in Kabbalah, sometimes this belief in the sages extends to different areas. Some of them are more easier for you to apply yourself, some are more difficult. It's still the same belief in the sages, it's still the same following the footsteps of the scientists who came before you. It's the same principle, there's no way around it. You can't prove everything back to the beginning every time. But in Kabbalah, it receives a deeper meaning, because that belief in the sages gives you additional things. We're not going to get into them right now, but trust me on that. Second thing is, in Kabbalah, is you have a feeling of truth. True that also scientists share a feeling of truth. There's no question that scientists operate based on what's in their heart, and the science only works to explain what they're already feeling to be true. So this confirmation bias we talked about in the beginning, they try to keep it out of the equation, but in the end, they wouldn't explore a topic unless they felt something in their heart. And that feeling of truth and following of the heart is fundamental to Kabbalah, because at the end of the day, no amount of proof or anything I can tell you will make you, or should make you, drop everything and follow Kabbalah. Maybe it's not for you. You should follow your heart. You should follow the feeling that you have. And if it feels right, you want to follow it. You may not understand everything right away, but you want to follow it. You want to give it your attention at the very least. And they just found, speaking of science and heart, they found that the heart is surrounded by a network of neuron-like cells, like in the brain. Almost like they're calling it the little brain, the small brain. I think the little brain. And so even your heart, that is sort of the seat of your desires and your changing emotional states, has its own little brain that adds to the calculation of your intellect. So definitely follow the heart. That's probably the best advice I can give to anyone who wants to who's considering studying Kabbalah. And if you want to, you're invited to follow your heart to our Zoom meeting, which will start now. And in the Zoom meeting, I'll also tell you more about our upcoming retreat in Europe, in Amsterdam. So I'll just say that we don't have I don't have the slide for some reason, but if you go to actually I can, no, I don't know if I can. Let me just do this. Hold on, stay with me one more second. I know we're over time, but it's going to be worth it. All right, so if you go to retreat, actually they have it in the chat, right? Okay, so I think that our chat team will, I'll put it here nevertheless for those who are not in the chat. Retreat dot KabU connect.com. Okay, you see it? Yes. Go there and you'll find all the information on the upcoming retreat, May 28th through June 1st in the Netherlands, a couple hours north of Amsterdam. It's phenomenal. It's the second year we're holding it, and it's absolutely amazing. More on that in our Zoom meeting. And that's all I have for you for today for his Kabbalah, his real Kabbalah, real science. You be the judges. I encourage you to read more about it, but most of all to give it some time, explore it. If it feels right in your heart, explore it. And I'll see you all on the Zoom and in our next Kabbalah Explained Simply. Thank you and have a great day.